Hi, I'm Will Houts. I'm the pastor at New Life Community Church, Reformed Church in America in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I'm a ordained teaching elder in the Presbyterian Church USA. I've been ordained for about 12 years now and had a fair number of experiences working with members of my congregation that have had significant issues in their lives. And when that ends up happening, I end up first of all, taking time to listen to where they're at and validating their feelings, because their experience of whatever is going on, whether it's the loss of a loved one, or it's a hard financial time, or it's a new cancer diagnosis, or other hardships, it's their experience, and it's absolutely true. And I believe God calls us to end up embracing people where they're at and with what they're dealing with, and move from there. And so the basic approach to pastoral care is to listen and help them articulate more of what they are going through and what they believe is happening, and start to explore meaning. Because one of the hardest parts about dealing with life's problems is the question of meaning. Why is this happening? What does this mean? What does this mean about God? What does this mean about me? And what does this mean about our lives in general? And so when we end up having those questions of meaning, we really have to stop and pause and listen, because it's out of those questions that we start to see what God is doing, and we start to understand what we actually believe. It's those questions that we really have to struggle with and figure out, even if we don't come to final answers. The first step is always to end up, saying, what's going on? Help me understand how you see this. And if they aren't quite sure, or if they end up having significant questions about what the Reformed tradition, which the Presbyterian and the Reformed Church in America, United Church of Christ, what those denominations come out of, there are multiple ways to understand the problem of suffering, the problem of difficulties. There's sort of the classic way of understanding it as, well, God has a plan that we just don't understand all the parts. And for some people, that is where they're at, and that's what I help them work with, because it honors what they believe and how they understand God working in their lives. I tend to move more towards a place that we understand humans have free will, have the ability to end up making choices, and because of all those choices that have been made by humans from the beginning of time, we end up with situations that we're living with, environmental factors that have come about over the course of centuries that end up bringing about cancer, choices about economic situations that lead to homelessness or poverty. Those ways of being and the choices end up having direct consequences. And so when we end up encountering those, we can end up looking at those and saying, this isn't what God wishes. This is a result of our own free will as humanity. And we also know God is a God of forgiveness and mercy, and the one who wants to make us whole. And because of that, God is working in those bad situations to bring something good out of it. We see that in the cross, that Jesus ended up going to the cross because of all of these other factors. And God in Christ chose to restrain his options, and ended up submitting to that. And because of that action, because of that choice, we end up seeing new possibilities and new life. We see resurrection come out of that because God takes those terrible situations and moves them in directions and opens up possibilities so that the redemption and restoration can happen.
I mean, I think that's true. And you look at just the church and at the beginning of the church and the persecution of the Christians at the beginning and how God used the persecution to spread the word. Because the Christians became complacent or became... Right. And I think, too, during a difficult time, if as one continues to trust in God and continue to rely upon God, God could use that because it's getting that uncomfortability and getting out to their normal.
Yeah, because when you end up looking at the early church, the persecution, the being thrown out of the temple, the way that they experienced hostility from Jews and from the Roman government, I don't think would be what God would have wanted. I don't think that that's God's will and choice to have that happen. God would have preferred everyone to be together in the peaceable kingdom. But, like you pointed out, God used that persecution, used those people in those very difficult situations to end up growing the church. God ended up opening up possibilities that people ended up acting on to help further the kingdom of God in helping others to see how Christians love one another, how they end up supporting one another, how they end up being willing to submit to what is happening, knowing that the ultimate reality of life rests with God, no matter what, whether we live or whether we die. We live or die to Christ.
Yeah, no, definitely. When, let's say someone's coming through divorce or going through that whole process, when do you point someone about going to get counseling? Because it's not always just the marriage counseling, it's counseling of themselves to deal with, because a lot of times too, our society, we don't deal with our emotions and learn to address that. And I think that's one
of the first steps is when you end up when I end up working with folks that are going through particularly difficult times, I end up asking them about what resources they have. Who do they have to turn to? Who do they have as support? Who do they have to talk this over with? And I am very clear that as a pastor, my job is not to be a counselor. I'm not trained as a counselor. I don't have the skills and the background to do that effectively. My job is to care, because a good counselor is going to end up pushing folks a bit. And while a pastor should push the congregation as a whole, it's also about maintaining those relationships so that folks have a feeling of this is a safe space that God is going to be present and hold me. And so when I go into a new community, a new church, new congregation, I end up looking for counseling resources in the area, having a list of at least 3 or 4, if not more, folks that I can refer to, folks that I've talked to that I have a good feeling about, that I end up knowing that they are competent and also can help those individuals explore what's going on their own with them.
Yeah, I think too, where I notice in the church, I mean, we're talking about Christ's love a lot of times, but I don't always show the love. Sometimes I think we tend to be too judgmental quick, then learn what someone's going through or what their perspective might be, and even how we approach maybe how one person comes to you and how they might be in that that shock mode or be that energetic anxiety mode, or their other things because of how they've been taught, partly due to their family, due to how their interaction of their family. Any tips or suggestions?
Well, I've seen that a number of points where a church has become calcified. They've become sort of stuck in, this is how we do it, this is what we're about, and they've lost that understanding that the church is not the four walls, but it's the relationships. Mm-hmm. It's the recognition that Christ is there present in that in-between space, that flows out of who God is, that God is inherently relational when we look at the doctrine of the Trinity. And so with that, the judgment comes in where, well, here are the absolute expectations. Here's how you're supposed to dress when you walk into church. Here's what you're supposed to deal with. Here's how you're supposed to act. And when we end up having that, it's a balancing act, quite honestly, because you have to provide care and concern to the folks whose hearts have been hardened to the idea that we're supposed to meet people where they are, and understand that everyone comes with their own brokenness, their own hurts, their own pain, their own history, their own things that give them, keep them up at night. And so it's a slow process of leading by example, of not saying that discouraging word, not saying the judgment of, well, this is wrong, you folks are doing this wrong, but it's the encouragement to say, folks, this is how Jesus met the people on the road. This is how Jesus met, the Pharisees and Sadducees. This is how Jesus ended up ministering among them. And if that is our example, if that's how we're supposed to be, then let's take a look at our own behavior. And so the ideal is that there is a sense of caring and community that comes together in the life of the congregation, so that when someone walks in off the street, there's questions about who are you, how are you, and how can you be part of us if you so desire. And that extends into the point where people are having hard times. Instead of saying, oh geez, well, they're on welfare, they should end up pulling themselves up by their bootstraps and getting out there and finding a job. The step back from that, the question is, what are they struggling with? What is broken? How do they need healing so that they can be freed to actively participate? That's one of the things that I include in my prayers every Sunday. We end up lifting up those who are discriminated against, those who are unemployed, the sick and the dying, the grieving and the lonely. So it keeps it in front of us so that we're aware that, oh hey, there are people with all of these issues, both in the world around us and right here next to us. And we need to be treading lightly because there's pain and brokenness there, but that pain and brokenness is also holy ground, where we can see God manifest. It's like Paul says, it's in my weakness that God is made known. And so we need to be treading lightly, and so it takes time and intentional effort to help the members of the congregation move past some of those rigid ways of seeing things and doing things that they've learned.
And I think you said the key is the help, like what is broken, what needs healing from the family who's on the welfare, or the struggles on that, because I know I grew up on welfare as a family, and there was dysfunctionalness. My father had PTSD, depression from the war.
Absolutely.
So what are those brokenness to get people to be able to start thinking through? And that's where, go to, send them to the licensed counselor, or listen to the people who could take that needed time to create the healing and help create a plan to move forward.
And there's also a needed recognition that this may not be something that can be healed in a short period of time.
Oh, no.
This is not something that can even necessarily be healed this side of life. It may be something that folks have to live with. I have a member of my congregation currently who has chronic pain, and she has huge difficulties getting out of bed even in the morning. And because of that, it's not something that's going to ever be healed. She's tried doctors for 25 years, and nothing has helped. And so it's, where can we find God's action even in that hard place? And she's a woman of deep faith, and it's also a very difficult struggle for she and her husband.
Now, anything you would suggest, kind of like final words for a person who's going through some hard time?
Final words?
I mean, not final. I mean, like within the interview.
I mean, if you're going through a difficult stretch where you're finding it hard to hold on, don't listen to those folks that say God only gives you what you can handle, because that's total, utter falsehood. God does not give you more than what you can handle together as a community. Handling something that's really large on your own is not what God has in mind. God has in mind that you will be part of a community that will support you when you are weak. And when you are strong and others are weak, you can turn around and do the same thing for them. We're never expected to hold any of this by ourselves. We're expected to hold it as a community of love that is gathered in the name of Christ and lives out Christ's mission of redemption for this entire world. And that means walking together and holding each other's burdens together.
Yeah, absolutely. That's well said. Very well said. And what about to a new pastor or church leader in helping?
To a new pastor, a new church leader, the best thing you can do is find a place to meet with other folks that have had extended experience. Work with folks that have had years and years of living with congregations and who can end up letting you figure things out on your own with guidance. Because as a pastor, as a leader, again, you're not expected to do this by yourself, but you're supposed to do it in community. And so having someone to talk things over with, say, this is a really hard situation that I'm dealing with. This is a, place that I'm not sure what to say or do. Having someone to be able to talk that over with, whether it's a pastoral counselor, whether it's another pastor, whether it's a group of pastors, it's absolutely key, because you need that time to reflect on what God is doing in their lives and yours, so that you can end up being present in those hard moments and listening, and not letting your own stuff, your own brokenness, get in the way of what God is trying to do. And so it's crucial to have support as a pastor or a pastoral leader.
Absolutely. Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.